Hey team, now it is our time again. We're going to be investigating the market model, waiting on a few more of you to arrive. Okay, now we've been looking at the market model. We've been discussing obviously the nature of the market model, setting the equilibrium price, setting the equilibrium quantity. Then we were looking at elasticity, all right? So we looked at price elasticity of demand and we saw, hello Sean, how are you?
Hi, and I'm good.
Good. Oh, Emma's here as well. Fantastic. How are you, Emma?
I'm good, and you?
I'm doing very well. I notice you've got as your icon Kermit the Frog. That's quite clever.
Yes.
All right, team. Good to see you all. Now, as said, we have looked at the market model. Okay, we've been discussing the elasticity. All right, just got an email from a year 13 who wants to have a meeting about their internal assessment. We've been looking at elasticity, and now we're looking at something about the government actually intervening in the market itself, right? We've been discussing things about pricing and how the government might want to actually control the price in the market, right? Remember, this is all about whether the market is fair, right? Whether it is appropriate or whether the government wants that particular price, right, for the learners, for the consumers, right, and for the producers. So it might be that the government thinks that the price is too high. Okay, it might be that the government thinks the price is too low. Right, either of those options are possible. Okay, now I posted into the classroom the Nearpod link. So if you wouldn't mind jumping into the Nearpod. All right, let's see. Don't have everybody yet. Some still to arrive. All right, it's fine. All right, so if you can jump into the Nearpod, I will open up the window, letting in the fresh air. Right, so the Nearpod code for today, we've got GP7AB. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through some of this. I'm going to review some of the material with you because we discussed it yesterday. We were looking at it yesterday. And then there's a activity that's being posted or about to be posted for you to do some work on. So GP7AB is the code. So let's hope that you're all arriving. I've got 3 of you, 5 of you. Oh, good, you're all arriving. It's fantastic. All right. Let's go back here. 11 names, 10, 9. Okay. All right. Now, you will remember some of our terminology that we talked about. You will remember we talked about complements, substitutes. We talked about derived demand. We talked about composite demand. And we talked about joint supply. These were all new terms, new to add to the glossaries. All right. One that I am particularly interested in is the idea of derived demand and an example. So apologies, I'm going to get you just to review that idea. Derived demand, what derived demand is, with an example, please. All right, so what was derived demand again? What did it mean for the demand to be derived? Maybe come up with an example. just as a review. Good working. Yeah, you're on the right path there. Very good, Lishan. Well done. Very good. That's a really good way to explain it. Yes, that's the right idea too. Right. Trying to come up with examples is always the tough bit. Yes, good work, Abu. Right. Okay, so that's really good. Now, as said, that's just a review. Now, the idea with Derive Demand, as you've all correctly ascertained, it is the demand for a good or a service based on the demand for another good or a service. So if it is labourers, people who work in the building industry, it is because perhaps they're being derived from the demand from housing. So there's increase in demand for houses, which leads to an increase in demand for the people who build the houses. It's that sort of an idea. It's quite a good one to remember because it will come in handy later on down the path. Now, when we're talking about the government intervening, we're thinking about price controls initially. We are going to think about some other interventions as well, but price controls, because that's an example of the government specifically trying to tinker, change, fix the actual market structure itself. Attempting to have a maximum price, which we remember we sometimes called a ceiling price, as in the price can't go above the ceiling. Right? It led to a massive amount of excess demand. But one of the possible solutions to that excess demand was the idea of creating a rationing system or a queuing system. Right? Why did we set the maximum price up? Right? What was the point behind having a maximum price? You've got about 30 seconds. There you go. All right, so this is your explanation skill. Good. Excellent. Yeah. Well done. See, we got the right ideas. Give another 30 odd seconds for Brandon and Lancelot. Add in some thoughts. Jim. Oh, okay, that's an interesting idea. That's a bit more advanced to think about reducing relative poverty. Yes, you're right, it could. That would be an attempt to do that. Work, Kane. All right, Lancelot. Brandon, you got an answer, Brandon? Answer. Okay. Now, we diagrammed the other day what a maximum price would look like. We saw that it was set below the equilibrium price. And the reason why it was set was because that's the maximum. We don't want it to go higher. Right? We want it to be like a lid put on the market. We figured that this equilibrium price was too high, so we're going to put the maximum price below that. If we were to put the maximum price above the equilibrium, it would be redundant. It wouldn't work. Okay, because the equilibrium price was already lower than that maximum price if we put it up there. So a bit of a trap for young players. Sometimes the examiner can actually ask you why the maximum price is actually put below the equilibrium price. We did diagramming before. The other one that we looked at was the price floor, or if you like, the minimum price. The idea being is that it's not allowed to go lower than that level. All right. Some examples that we've seen, we discussed agricultural markets, right? The guaranteed minimum prices for agricultural markets, minimum wages. But the downside, the danger to them is having perhaps an excess supply or a surplus of that product generated because of that minimum price, okay? We're not letting the price go lower. So what possible solutions? Well, as we've said, that there is some possible solutions where the government might actually buy up the surplus, right, and store it, maybe, right? Now, yeah, then we had to figure out why a government might actually put a minimum price in. So again, this is the explanation, right? Practicing explaining why these particular interventions might be put in place. So you've got about 30 more seconds and go. What was a minimum price? Why do we put it in place? What's the point of it? What possible consequences could it lead to? Good, very good, Lishan. Good, got some more coming in. Yes, very good, Emma. Okay, good work, hubby. Yeah, okay, Hachna, I see that. All right, wait on the last few. Add some thoughts. Good. Okay. Yeah, you're on the right path there, Brandon. Right. Yeah. Good. Work, Lancelot. Waiting on one more. All right. Okay. Moving on. We illustrated our minimum price. There it is, the solid line, suggesting that it is a legal minimum. Right? We do tend to set a minimum price above the equilibrium. If we were to set a minimum price below an equilibrium, again, it'd become a bit redundant because it's a minimum price, so the market would then end up back at the equilibrium. Right? It has some quite significant effects, as you see. It causes there to be an excess of quantity supplied over quantity demanded. You end up with a surplus, and it potentially could be a very big surplus. Right? And what do you do with the surplus? Do you store it? Do you sell it at a cheaper price somewhere else? What happens? All right. Very complicated situation. You've done the diagramming. You did that the other day. All right. One of the things that we talked about here was the idea of an agricultural market and how important sometimes it is to have those minimum prices, particularly if the agricultural market is essential for your economy. It might be that it's a, you talk about less developed economies, and we're going to, when you do IB, you'll go more into detail about that. But some countries, they are very dependent on their agricultural industry. And as a result of that, minimum prices, that sounds like a great idea. But as we see, can lead to some pretty significant effects, right? Wine lakes and butter mountains and all of those other sorts of things that could occur. Other ones that you might see potentially as interventionist is the idea of minimum wages. And I think we talked about this the other day, right? Where you can actually put a minimum wage in place in a labor market to protect people who may not have, they may not have the skills that other workers might have. They may be younger than other workers. They may have only just entered the labor market, or they might be from a group that is traditionally discriminated against, perhaps, within a labor market, right? And therefore may not earn as much. So having that in is perhaps about equity. It's perhaps about fairness, maybe, right, within a labor market, right? However, it's a minimum price. And so as we saw when we mapped it, no, we didn't map it. Sorry, jumping through. Oh. As we saw when we mapped it, if that was a minimum wage there, it would actually lead to a surplus again, but it would be a surplus of workers. So you're actually going to create unemployment. There is all these people here who would join the labor market, right? Because they see this increase in supply. So this is now workers, more people wanting a job because the wage has gone up. But of course, because the wage has gone up, it's more expensive to employ people, so the demand for workers would actually decrease. So you would end up with a surplus of workers, which we know is unemployment. And that's a bit of a problem. And the people who are becoming unemployed in that situation might actually be the very people that the minimum wage was set up in place. Because when you're an employer, you're going to be wanting to employ the most skilled people, not the least skilled. So you pay them more, happy to, yes, because they're the most skilled. So therefore you will employ them. So this minimum wage might actually hurt the very people it's actually trying to help. And again, this is one of those situations in economics where we discuss the ethics, right, and the equity issues involved. And that can be a bit of a major theme, you might ask, you might think. All right, now we're going to move through that. So here are some of our big questions, okay? What happens if the government intervenes in a market model? Well, as we've seen, it actually can cause a disequilibrium to occur. It can mean that the market isn't efficient anymore. It could mean that there's a misallocation of resources, all things economists aren't very keen on. So should they intervene? Well, that might depend then on your philosophy. You might think, you might agree with the government, the price here is too low, so therefore the government should put a price control in. The price here is too high, the government should put a price control in. Right? You might feel that's a really good thing for the government to do. So long as you understand that with that philosophy, then comes the consequences that follow. So maybe then it's the job of the economist to say, okay, that's the philosophy, this is what we're going to do. So those consequences, we now need to find solutions to those. Right? Now, there are real life examples of minimum wages. Lots of countries have them. Right? There is also something called rent control, which is a price control on rental cost. So if you don't own a house, but you're renting a house, sometimes it's that rental cost that can be quite expensive. And so sometimes governments will control that price as well. All right, so if I move on one. Now, here's a little bit of a research for you. Now, in New York, those of you who know that such a place exists in the United States of, well, I say United States, in the States, all right? In New York, the government, yeah, it was quite a while ago, you're talking like the 1980s, right? The government put rent control on properties in New York. And I think they're planning on doing it again, if I'm not mistaken. So when they are controlling the rent for rental properties in New York, what do you think? So they're trying to make it affordable, right? They think that it is too expensive to rent in New York. If you've ever been there, you might have noticed how expensive it is to be there. Okay, all right. So therefore, they're going to put a maximum price on rent. Okay, can't rent above that. Can't charge rents higher than that price. Well, what will happen then in the market for rental properties in New York if they put a maximum price on rent? 30 seconds, go. So have a go. What do you think will happen? Or what do you know did happen? Interesting idea. Good thinking. Oh, good work, Hung. Absolutely on the right path. Well done, Abby. Very well written. Wait, not a few more. Have a thought. Very well done, Lishan. Well done. A few more to have a go. Yes, you're right, Harshner. It will increase the demand. Hang on another couple, and then we'll have a quick discussion. All right, 30 more seconds. Waiting for Jackie. Come on, Jackie. Okay. Well, I think we've waited. So, what exactly happened in New York? Well, you're absolutely right. There was an excess of demand on the properties. All right, they don't just build. If you've been to New York, they're not just going to build new houses, particularly if they're not able to charge a high enough rent in order to make it worth their while. So yes, there was a lot more people who could afford properties, but there weren't the properties to rent. So there were absolutely right, a lot more people who were unable to get a house. So it did lead to, at the time, a big increase in what's called homelessness. A lot of people who weren't able to afford to live in a house. Now, a little bit of pop cultureness, if I can throw that in. If you've ever seen the TV sitcom Friends, right, it is based in New York, and it is based in New York at the time, at the very time that rent control in New York was actually happening. Okay, that's when it was it was based. Right? So when you see them in the apartments in the TV show, those apartments are actually rent controlled. And a couple of times, some of the plot lines in the TV show Friends actually revolve around the idea of rent control for their apartments. Okay? It's just a little quirky thing. It led to some people doing things perhaps a little bit illegally, like what's called subletting, like allowing other people to live in your house that you weren't technically allowed to let them to live in there, and then they help pay, right? All of those sorts of things were happening, right? So rent control led to an increase in demand for rental properties. There wasn't the rental properties available because there were less of them, right? Because it wasn't worth the while people renting them. And what ended up happening was there was, yes, you're absolutely right, an increase in the number of people who were actually homeless as a result of it. All right, so I'm going to stop the sharing. We will jump out of the Nearpod and we will jump back to the meet. All right, push that button. Now, ladies and gentlebeans, what I have done is I have posted a couple of wee exercises. One is a question, right, where you just look it up and find a quick answer to it. The other one is a bit of a research and explain. And it's about real life. It's about trying to find a real life example of, in this particular context, an intervention in a market, a real life example of either a maximum price or a minimum price, right? And then explain. So then you're going to put the link into, it's a document. I wonder if I can show you the document. Where is it gone? Where's my, right. So just jump into the window again. All right, so here it is. All right, so this is what you're going to do. You're all going to have the same document. You're going to write under the column that says learner, that's where you write your name. Then in here, that's where you put the link, the hyperlink to the research, right? To the example you have found of either a maximum price or a minimum price. So you're going to find a real life example of a maximum price or a minimum price, and you're going to put the hyperlink in there. All right. Try not to do everybody doing exactly the same way. All right. Is the idea behind this. All right. Then in here, in this cell, you're then going to explain what's happening. Why was it put in place? Can you see any effects? Are there any effects that you might expect to see as a result of this particular price control? All right. Now, the idea here is it's application. It's finding a real life example. It's applying the concept of maximum and minimum prices. But because you're finding real life examples, you're going to be able to use those real life examples potentially in the future in an exam question where you might be asked about maximum and minimum prices, and then you're able to use this. It's also really good to help you cement your understanding, and it's also about practicing writing in a explanation, right, as to what the theory is actually meaning. All right, so that's all very good. So that's what I'd like you to have a go at. Well, there you go, Abu, good man. All right, so if I come back to here, stop presenting. How do I stop presenting? Stop presenting. Okay, so that's what I'm going to want you to do. So I'm going to post into the classroom just to say that's what I want you to do. I will post a link to the recording once that's all processed. Otherwise, as we'd say in the land of my birth, hei kone rā, which means goodbye for now.
So all we need to do is the real life examples, right?
Yes, there's two. There's a question that should appear or have appeared, and then there's that research there. Yes, and if you're able to do reviewing, that would be good as well.
All right, Mr. David, can you please put the slides on the site?
Yes.
Okay,
yes,
thank
I
you.
can well and truly do that. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. David.
Thank you. See you. Still in the meet, guys.